Across the boardroom table, the new CTO grinned. Gavin's security theater doesn't add value. Speed is important. Gavin Mercer's my name. Up until recently, I was the lead security architect at Treventa Systems in Toronto, Ontario. I am 41 years old. I oversaw the creation and upkeep of the infrastructure for over 300 clients across Canada for 9 years, protecting their private financial information. I had outlasted 4 CTOs and 3 CEOs. The fifth was Damian Cross, and I knew he would be the most deadly after 15 minutes of our first leadership meeting. There was no response from anyone in the room, but his comments came as a silent challenge. Our longtime product director, Tessa Linwood, moved uneasily in her chair, but remained silent. Without showing any signs of disagreement, the other department heads continued to stare at their tablets while feigning to go over the figures. Evidently delighted by the lack of opposition, Damian leaned back. He went on looking over the quarterly security evaluation that I had spent weeks assembling, saying, "We're falling behind. Our rivals are deploying twice as quickly. We have bloated development cycles. Legacy structures are not what we need. Lean systems are." I maintained a controlled tone while I looked him in the eyes. Those rivals have experienced breaches as well. Every shortcut raises risk in our area of business. He dismissed the worry and waved his hand. Recovery, not prevention, is the focus right now. Everybody is compromised. How swiftly we recover is what counts. Everyone. That phrase lingered in the atmosphere, urging someone to raise their voice. I looked around, hoping to hear a voice I knew. No one showed up. Since we acquired it, the room had undergone changes. This crew would have posed the difficult questions a few years ago. Most now only wanted to keep their jobs because of the pressure from the new board and Damian's radical changes. I cleared my throat. Respectfully, Damian, our architecture is customized rather than legacy. Our clients anticipate that we won't be compromised. He grinned once more. Gavin Treventa is no longer a boutique consultancy. Scale is what we want. This entails third-party alliances, cloud-native technologies, and standards. The board concurs. Damian was unaware that Treventa's security architecture wasn't constructed using off-the-shelf parts since he hadn't inquired. It was a need. Due to limited funds while the business was just getting started, I created proprietary access restrictions, tiered monitoring systems, and custom firewalls from the ground up. They were robust, efficient, and not well documented. The employer never authorized time or funds for formal knowledge transfer, not because I was irresponsible. All of this was stored in my mind and in my scribbled notes. I inhaled and gave it another go. I'd be pleased to explain to you why these systems operate as they do. He interjected firmly, shutting his laptop. We don't have time for that today. Everyone is really busy getting ready for the launch of the client portal. Let's put the security discussion on hold. The meeting was adjourned. Backs of chairs scraped. The silent compliance of those who understood not to resist caused the room to empty. I was caught in the hallway by Tessa, who hovered close to the door. She said softly, "Are you all right?" I lied and said I'm fine. My jaw was clenched. Her smile was feeble. He's merely attempting to leave his mark. Give it some time. However, time was not the issue. It was understanding. Out of habit, I accessed the monitoring console back at my desk. It all seemed normal. No noise, no flags. However, something wasn't quite right. It is possible for a system to be stable until it becomes unstable. As the discussion came to a conclusion, I was certain that someone who didn't understand the systems I had created was going to take them down. I found out I couldn't access the logging server I had been using for 9 years, 3 days after that meeting. I initially believed it to be a permissions issue, though uncommon on the security side, especially not to admin-level credentials that occasionally occurred following a system update. I quietly submitted a ticket to the help desk so as not to cause any concern. I received the response less than 15 minutes later. Unified monitoring is now used to route security logs in accordance with a new instruction from the CTO's office. As a result, access has been limited. My stomach grew constricted. As a general IT tool, unified monitoring worked well for tracking performance server loads and application uptime. For in-depth security forensics, however, it was a plaything. Months ago, I had marked it as insufficient. It was unable to track privilege, escalations, identify zero-day activities, or even detect lateral movement due to its streamlined UI and default alarm settings. Two other custom-built tools were either missing or deactivated by midday. There was a quiet cleansing going on. One of my younger engineers, Owen Blake, was green but sharp, and I ran into him in the hallway after lunch. His eyes darted from left to right like someone approaching a danger, and he stopped in the middle of his stride upon seeing me. I said, attempting to sound informal, "Hey." He said hey, then paused. "May I ask you a strange question?" "All right. Were you aware that Damien has been posing inquiries concerning our firewall rule procedure? For example, what is the duration, and if there are any solutions for urgent pushes?" I stopped. "How did you explain it to him?" I clarified that before to deployment, each rule undergoes sandbox testing and triple validation, as we always have, And he persisted in pushing, said things like, "If we truly need it, there's a faster way." Owen was uneasy. "That's not how you built it," I informed him. It was a lingering sentence, not the way you constructed it. The length of time wasn't the only factor. It has to do with control. Regarding being aware of the dangers before opening doors, you may never close again. Tessa asked me to stop by the cafe beside Union Station for coffee later that afternoon. With the trolley rattling by every few minutes, we located a table close to the window. She whispered to me, "They've pulled QA out of 3 sprints this quarter. While testing is ongoing, we are deploying features. These days, velocity is everything." "How about adherence?" She raised 2 fingers to create air quotes as she stated, "They're interpreting it." Not my words, but Damien's. After taking a sip of her coffee, she leaned in a little. "Gavin, you ought to defend yourself. There's a problem." I stayed late at work that evening. I needed to see it for myself, not because anyone asked. When Treventa was still operating out of a rented co-working space, I opened the old dashboard that I had constructed, my code, my guidelines. Everything was visible. The previous evening, 3 unsuccessful attempts to log in had been made from an internal IP that was unrelated to any active users. They had attempted to use credentials associated with a contractor account. That had been deprecated because Damien's team had routed logging to a visual dashboard that didn't process hidden rule alerts. The system hadn't sounded an alarm. My previous code did, however. Despite being brief, the audit trail was clear. The perimeter had been examined, and no one else took attention. I became aware that I was the only one remaining who even knew where to look at that point. I went back to my desk, connected a tiny USB drive, and started transferring my notes, which included data segmentation maps, firewall philosophy, alert logic, and architecture overviews. Nothing that was officially Treventa's. Only my techniques. When we lacked the funds to purchase a fortress, I used the concepts and constructions I had already established. Out of habit, I glanced over my shoulder as the files moved. With fluorescent lights humming overhead and a few workers working behind high-back monitors. The workplace was silent. I got no attention at all. I stored everything I could on an encrypted USB drive that evening, just in case. A calendar invite for security model restructuring, conference room B, 2 p.m. showed up on Thursday morning. There was no meeting. A verdict was rendered. The time slot was afternoon. Just late enough that no one would stay after. And I had been there long enough to identify the tone and structure. That made quiet escapes easier. As I always do, I spent the morning going over logs confirming segmentation layers and double-checking intrusion warnings. For now, everything remained the same. But every day I had less and less access. Tools that I used to have complete control over now need requests. I used to get notifications instantly, but now they go through a ticketing system. Before the conference, I strolled past the coffee carts on Bay Street and observed young analysts rushing inside glass towers while sporting reusable cups and branded lanyards. The majority were unaware of the hidden safeguards in place for their data. Why ought they to? That was my responsibility, or had been. I arrived at conference room B at precisely 2:00 p.m. to find Damien seated in a fine suit with his laptop open. Our HR lead, Heather, was seated across from him. Before a word was uttered, the tone was established. "Gavin, thank you for coming," Damien said in a neutral tone. "This will be brief." I didn't sit, but I did nod. He went on, "We're reorganizing the security function, embedding security responsibilities within each product team, and transitioning to a distributed model." I crossed my arms. "And the fundamental systems? The perimeter architecture is maintained by whom? The logic of segmentation." With ease, he responded, We're moving to third-party cloud-native tools with standardized protocols. It is more expandable, less reliant on tribal wisdom. That phrase was there, the silent rejection of 9 years' worth of late-night patching marathons. Arduous compliance solutions and customized frameworks, a liability reduced to tribal knowledge. A branded folder was slid across the table by Heather. The severance package is described here. Extended benefits accelerated equity vesting from the transaction in 2 months' compensation. I opened it and looked at the numbers. Generous. Fair enough. It informed me that the person who made this decision was far higher up than Damien. He wasn't the architect, he was the messenger. Before you depart today, you must return your access cards and credentials, he continued. Over the following 2 weeks, Owen will be in charge of the knowledge transfer. You can be reached by phone, but you don't have to come in. I stated bluntly, Owen is not familiar with the entire system. Nobody does. The board never approved the time, therefore it was never documented, not because I didn't want to. I asked 6 times. 6 times I was denied. Damien's mouth tightened. The wikis contain everything. I answered not the context, not the justification for each set of rules, each bypass condition and each internal escalation lock. Quiet. Heather smiled politely as she had been trained to do. I took a tiny notepad out of my pocket and started writing. Each credential domain admin, VPN root firewall, console backup dashboard should have a single line. I passed it across the table with my ID card and security badge. As I turned to go, Damien remarked, I know change is hard. However, this is the company's best course. I didn't respond. I caught a glimpse of myself as I walked past the conference room's glass wall, tired. Definitely but calm. I took in the quiet as I moved slowly down the hallway. The Treventa mission statement, Canada's most trusted data partner, was still displayed in the lobby. That plaque was earned in part by me, and now, someone who had no idea how deep the foundation was erasing me. Outside, the skyline was bleeding orange as the sun hung low over Lake Ontario. The breeze was clean and brisk when I drove down to the seaside and parked with my windows down, facing the water. I was not enraged, not at all, only a flimsy surety. People who believed platforms could be rebuilt without knowing what held them. Together were something I had seen before. Leadership that confused strength with speed. It never ended well. I realized they had made a disastrous error by the time I arrived at the lakeshore. My phone buzzed with a message from Owen 2 days after I left. Several warnings. We're flying in the dark. Kindly give us a call. I hovered my thumb over the screen while I glanced at it. I briefly contemplated removing the message. Let them solve it. Allow them to witness what occurs. When you destroy the fundamentals of a system that you never bothered to comprehend. But it takes years to break behaviors that have been formed. The call button was tapped by me. On the first ring, Owen responded. His voice was strained as he said, Thank God. There is a problem with the Eastern Gateway. Strange spikes in traffic are occurring. Yet none of the typical notifications are displaying anything. I took a seat. How about the layer of secondary verification? Quiet. What at last, he inquired. It was there. I said I built a hidden dashboard. It operates alongside the primary system. Searches for unusual behavior rather than just known dangers. Legacy admin access is required. Owen declared I don't have it. They never provided me with my complete credentials. Naturally, they hadn't. They hadn't considered who would take over in their haste to get rid of me. Owen wasn't ready. Despite his intelligence, he was too inexperienced to use a map to navigate the back end. I urged him to get someone from IT leadership, or Damien. They must approve gateway lockdown right now. Go to the backup line if you fail. I'll give it a shot, he said quietly. However, nobody knows exactly what the backup line is. I shut my eyes. So you're already behind the curve for breaches? Hours went by. 3 additional calls from Treventa numbers went unanswered. Then came Damien, the one I knew would arrive. Gavin, he said in a strained voice, we're observing strange activity. It's not being picked up by monitoring. No, I answered. It wouldn't. You destroyed the system. He remarked, we could use your insight, maybe a brief phone consultation. Do you want my opinion on the security framework that you determined to be outdated? No one claimed it wasn't required. You took it off. That is equivalent. A pause. He added hastily, we'll pay your contractor rate. Whatever makes sense. I stated I charge $800 an hour as a contractor, a minimum of 4 hours, paid in advance, as well as a signed declaration that I accept no responsibility for the results. Another pause, this one longer. Then I'll have the paperwork drafted by legal. Don't waste your time, I said. I've taken a job somewhere. I'm not accessible. That was a false statement. As of yet, I hadn't accepted anything. Damien, however, was unaware of that. I wanted him to sense it too, that he could no longer reach me. He stated, "This is serious." Yes, I said, "It is." I hung up and switched off my phone. I had a mug of cold coffee and watched the CN Tower disappear into the night skyline that evening while I sat outside my condo's window. A firewall was malfunctioning somewhere in the city, and no one understood how to fix it. I got my laptop open. Voicemails, LinkedIn messages, and even a message from Martin Vance, the CEO of Treventa, with the direct subject line "urgent" were piling up in my inbox. Escalation of data risk. Seeing it happen from the outside was weird. I had been on the front lines of intrusion prevention for years, dealing with audits, assessments, and consecutive compliance briefings. I was an observer now. Not for long, though. Rachel's son and I met at Sentinel Secure that afternoon. "We've been following what happened," she replied simply. "We also want to provide you a future." By lunchtime, the headlines were, "Treventa Systems examines a data breach impacting more than 40 customers." I knew what had happened without even looking at the headline. Nevertheless, I read the piece twice. A possible external intrusion that targeted client financial databases was described. It had been more than 8 hours since the vulnerability was discovered. Unnamed inside sources claimed that incomplete incident documentation and lack of visibility had caused the security response to be delayed. I didn't laugh. It wasn't amusing. It was unavoidable. I got a text from Tessa that morning. "This place is in disarray. No one can tell what is real and what isn't. Damien remains inside the boardroom." I'm sorry to hear that, was my straightforward response. I meant it too. For her, for Owen, for everyone remained in the machine that I had assisted in creating. Martin Vance left me a voicemail later that day. His voice had a tight tone, yet it was desperate rather than furious. "I know it didn't go well, Gavin, but we need your assistance. We can get past whatever transpired between you and Damien. Customer information is at risk. Give me a call personally, please." I didn't answer the phone. I choose to concentrate on my new position at Sentinel Secure instead. Rachel had given me complete control over the establishment of a new consulting division for the financial sector. My pay at Treventa was doubled. No red tape. A group I select, and above all, respect. I took in the late autumn haze of Toronto's skyline from my new office on the 24th floor. I should have been elated, validated. However, I experienced a more subdued feeling, akin to the conclusion of an extended conflict that no one was aware had even been waged. The following day, Tessa gave me another call. "Your outdated infrastructure is incomprehensible to the external response firm," she stated. "They are attempting to manually patch things, but they are unsure of the location of the tripwires." I responded I requested documentation budgets 6 times. They were consistently turned away. "I understand," she said. "That's the reason I'm phoning. Not to seek assistance, just to let you know you were correct." The final syllable caused a slight crack in her voice. I shut my eyes. "Tess, look after yourself. You as well." Hour by hour, news coverage grew more intense. Prominent customers started to withdraw, making public declarations on loss of confidence and irreversible security concerns. Within a week, stock analysts predicted that Treventa's value would fall by over 30%. The silent portion, nobody called out Damien by name. But I knew, and the important people knew too. Later that week, Rachel entered my office with a faint smile. She remarked, "You've got momentum. 2 former Treventa clients have already contacted us. One inquired as to whether you had any input into our architecture." I gave a nod. "How did you explain it to them?" "I told them you constructed it. Additionally, we should not disregard our architects." I didn't respond. I just looked down at my notepad, where I had been writing the first chapter of our internal recovery framework, because I wanted to assist customers do more than just respond. At the top, the title said, "Avoidance of the Next Treventa." I clicked save. Just then, a fresh message appeared in my LinkedIn inbox. It came from a well-known name. "Verifin recently had a breach. They want to know if you are available." Half of Sentinel's financial security team, which had tripled in size 6 months later, were former Treventa employees. Now, 2 desks away from me, Owen was more shrewd, self-assured, and combat-tested. Last month, Tessa started working for us as the head of our client communications department. Analysts, engineers, and even a compliance officer who had vowed to stay at Treventa, unless the building burned down, well, it didn't burn, had gradually arrived. It simply fell apart. We hardly discussed the past. We no longer had to not because it was painful. The clients who remained, the breaches that were prevented, and the trust that we reestablished methodically, openly, and purposefully were the testaments to our efforts. I was standing at the edge of a hotel ballroom full with cybersecurity experts one clear March morning in Vancouver. With breakout panels, networking lounges, vendor displays with dashboards that flashed, and sponsored coffee, the annual Canadian InfoSec conference was in full flow. I had just concluded a presentation on layered segmentation techniques when I recognized a person at the bar. Vance Martin. He had changed appearance, thinner. The area around the temples is gray. He had not touched his drink. Silently, I walked up. Martin. Startled but not hostile, he turned and nodded. Gavin, I didn't think you would be here. This year I'm giving a speech. He looked down at his drink and answered, Of course you are. Congratulations. You are deserving. For a short while we stood silently while the hum of the crowd filled the air between us. No animosity at last, he inquired. None, I answered. Business choices have repercussions, that's all. He laughed, a little sardonic and shrewd. We are now paying Sentinel 3 times what you were previously paid for consulting services. My eyebrow went up. The price of security is always covered. After is simply more costly. With a nod, he raised his glass and gave me a soft clink. To those who construct in silence. To those who hear, I answered. Rachel had a folder full of questions when I got back to Toronto that week, including requests for recovery plans, follow-ups, and new customers. She said, Verifin confirmed. They desire a thorough audit. You are in the lead. I gave a headshake. Send the younger group. They need to deal with something more complicated. She grinned. Delegation. I enjoy it. I went back to my workstation that afternoon and opened the internal knowledge base we had been creating. It wasn't ostentatious. There was no business jargon or too elaborate imagery. Simply organized, unambiguous documentation. Logic of the system. Layers in a diagram. Protocols for responses. Matrix of risks. Everything I would have liked to have 10 years ago. I went to the last part, which I hadn't finished for weeks. The section that, both technically and conceptually, brought everything together. The base. The rationale behind each design decision. The benefit of patient construction and the expense of taking shortcuts. Grabbing a black pen, I scrawled the title in bold, legible letters. The basis of confidence. Conform. They lost that after all. And what we are currently building. Betrayal leaves you with a particular stillness that lingers long after the meeting is over. The badges handed in and the mechanisms you created are destroyed by those who never understood them. I have experienced that quiet, and when truth comes to light, not through rage or retaliation, but through clarity, patience, and accuracy, I've also experienced the calm, steady satisfaction that follows. It's not just my tale. It reflects the experience of so many others being devalued, ignored, and replaced just to demonstrate that content eventually triumphs over noise. Keep in mind that integrity is more important than ambition if you're in the midst of that storm. Additionally, people who develop with intention will always outlive those who merely focus on getting results. I appreciate you listening to me. Leave a 1 in the comments section if this story touched you. And think about subscribing for more real tales of justice, tenacity, and silent triumph. I also encourage you to share your experiences if you have experienced something similar. You never know who could find it empowering.